During the civil unrest of 2020, then-President Trump sought to aggressively prosecute protesters accused of damaging federal property with an executive order directing federal law enforcement to seek 10-year prison penalties in such cases. While the presidency has changed hands, many activists' lives are still affected by last summer. One such activist is Jason Charter. Charter was arrested in July 2020 and accused of participation in the destruction of a statue of Confederate Albert Pike in Washington, D.C., and the attempted destruction of a statue of Andrew Jackson that sits outside the White House. He faced 20 years in prison, and the Trump administration flaunted the arrest. Then President Trump even referenced Charter as the ringleader at his Mount Rushmore speech on July 4th.
I am pleased to report that yesterday, federal agents arrested the suspected ringleader of the attack on the statue of the great Andrew Jackson in Washington, D.C. People who damage or deface federal statues or monuments will get a minimum of 10 years in prison.
While on pretrial release, Charter was rearrested and charged with misdemeanor assault over a confrontation with right-wing journalist Jack Posobiec at a community meeting over whether to remove a statue of Abraham Lincoln from a D.C. park. In October, he was also arrested at the National Mall while protesting a conservative rally advocating voters walk away from the Democratic Party. 1 year and a new administration later, Charter agreed to plead guilty to a single count of misdemeanor trespassing in order to resolve all of the charges from last year. News to Share sat down with Jason Charter to discuss the summer of 2020, the charges, and the future of the anti-fascist movement. Jason, can you first introduce yourself and the movement that you are a part of?
My name's Jason Charter. I'm 26 years old, and I'm an anti-fascist activist.
And in your own words, what happened over the summer of 2020?
In June of 2020, George Floyd was murdered by police officers and was put in a chokehold for over 7 minutes, which caused him to suffocate and die. After his death, all over the country, people decided to rise up because we were all fed up with the injustice that happens in this country when innocent people are murdered by the police with no justice for the people murdered, and the police almost always get off scot-free, and we were not going to let it happen this time. Here in DC, here in Portland, New York, Seattle, Atlanta, pretty much all over the country, people were rising up because they just said enough is enough. And unfortunately, throughout that summer, people kept dying and people kept getting thrown in jail for the wrong reasons, and it kept escalating to this day where we see people all over the country trying to fight for civil rights, and which the fight is going to continue for a long time.
So you recently pled guilty to one count, which kind of resolved all of the stuff from the summer, but I kind of want to go back through sort of what happened. The first of the situations that they had originally charged you with was the Albert Pike statue. What happened there?
Well, the charges were dropped, so I think that says all that matters. Albert Pike was toppled by the community in DC, a statue that has been voted over a dozen times in the past 20 years by DC Council to be removed, but did not get removed. And I think the community who had all these feelings over what happened, these feelings of hopelessness, these feelings that everything we do doesn't really achieve anything. I think those led to people choosing to take action and take down a statue of a Confederate general.
So it was only 2 days later that right here where we're sitting, the Andrew Jackson statue behind you was almost toppled over, let's say. And that was the other thing for which you were charged. What happened that day?
Well, the community gathered like they did every day since the death of George Floyd in this area, which became BLM Plaza. Things occurred where people gained entrance to the park. What I did that day and what I did every day, which was try to protect the community and try to protect my comrades around me to make sure that another Charlottesville didn't happen, then someone didn't get killed for the wrong reason, the police didn't harm people. Unfortunately, what I did was considered trespassing under federal law, and that's why I pled guilty to entering restricted grounds, which is the equivalent of trespassing, and it's a misdemeanor.
And it was only a few days after that at Lincoln Park there was a confrontation between some anti-fascists, allegedly including yourself, and Jack Posobiec, a sort of right-wing journalist, which you were also charged for. Again, from your perspective, what happened there?
Well, I can't speak to that incident due to a court order. I can say that I am innocent of any charges pertaining to that day, and that I think the videos of that day speaks for itself.
Jack put you on the cover of his book. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Again, due to a court order, I actually can't speak about this as much as I would love to.
Moving forward a little bit, it was a week after kind of all of those things happened that you were actually arrested. What did that look like?
Well, it was had to be the scariest thing next to what happened in Charlottesville ever happened to me. I woke up to loud bangs on my door. Next thing I hear is police open the door, and obviously, I open the door. Next thing I know, 6 guys in full military gear rush into my apartment, making me get on the ground, saying they're going to shoot me if I don't cooperate, etc., etc. And it's by far one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, and to this day I don't feel safe wherever I stay because of what happened there.
Did that situation sort of inform or change your view of police?
No, I had pretty much the same view of police before and after. I believe that the American quote-unquote justice system only serves a certain sect of the population, mostly white folks, especially racist white folks who uphold a system that is crippling minorities around this country. And I don't think that will ever change. I don't think my opinion on that will change.
And so it was a few months later, it was in October, that you got arrested one more time. And that was at the Walk Away event. Again, what happened there?
Well, the charges were dropped because I think they had no merit. I was there to express my First Amendment right to, speak out against what I believed was tyranny in the country and what I still believe is tyranny. Supporting a fascist president like Donald Trump. And 1 minute I'm just walking around with counter-protesters, and the next thing I know I'm on the ground being arrested and dragged, literally dragged by 2 cops because I can barely walk without my cane, dragged by 2 cops in handcuffs into the back of a car and then eventually to a hospital because I sustained injuries from the police assaulting me.
What was the reason for being out there opposing the Walk Away movement?
They were mostly a group of QAnon supporters, and if you don't know, which I'm sure you do, the QAnon movement is a group of people who believe conspiracy theories, mostly surrounding Donald Trump and his presidency, the election that happened, the last presidential election where Joe Biden won. They believe it didn't, and they have all these crazy conspiracy theories that they say prove it. And they also believe that the vaccine is some type of, thing that's meant to harm Americans, when in reality it's meant to save lives. So I went out there because I believed that movement, and I still believe that movement is a harm to society, that these lies that are being spread are literally getting people killed to this day. You see COVID numbers rising, especially in states where QAnon supporters are known to be more of the population. You see less people having vaccines and higher hospitalization rates.
Dan Crenshaw, the congressman, was one of the people in attendance. I mean, to some extent, there were mainstream conservatives there. Where exactly do you draw the line? How do you define sort of who it is that you view anti-fascism as opposing?
Well, there are a lot of lines to be drawn on a lot of different topics, like race, like gender, religion, in that case, the election. I think people like Crenshaw, like Jim Jordan, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, I think all these congressmen are actually helping fuel the flames of the QAnon movement that literally tried to take over this country on January 6th. I don't think you've ever seen anti-fascists ever try to violently take over this country and overturn a certified election results. And I think that shows a huge contrast in anti-fascist ideology and the ideology of the QAnon movement, of the Trump movement, of this fascist movement that's continuously growing in America.
I'm sure there are people who are watching this who, after hearing you say that, are going to say, well, what about people burning a police precinct or attacking courthouses in Portland, that sort of thing? How do you draw the distinction?
I think people have the right to protect their own community. On January 6th, almost all of the people who were there were people who aren't from DC in the first place. They killed people that day. They were going to kill more people. Generally, anti-fascists are always out there to protect the community, or like we did in Charlottesville. Like we do in DC all the time when fascists try to come into this city, and like they do all over the country, like in Portland and Seattle and New York, and I can continue name a variety of other cities. We protect communities. What these people do is they come in and terrorize them.
So focusing back on 2020, it was at the time the Trump administration characterized you as the ringleader of Antifa. Can you talk to me about what was kind of the context of what was going on in the country at the time and what it meant to you to be characterized that way by the government?
Well, I found out while sitting in handcuffs in central lockup in DC, someone was like, "You were on TV," and I'm like, "What do you mean?" "Oh, they just called you the leader of Antifa." I'm like, "Who?" They're like, "Trump." I'm like, "What?" It was a shock to me because he can't be the leader of an idea, and that's what anti-fascism is. It's an idea. People choose to follow that ideology. Some groups choose to adhere to that ideology, but in itself there is no organization called Antifa. There are no leaders like the Proud Boys movement, which actually has sergeant at arms, vice presidents, treasurers, chapter presidents, national presidents, all that stuff. They have a giant hierarchy. They're a gang. Anti-fascism is an idea, and I think that's a huge difference between what we are and what the right is, because it's not just the Proud Boys, it's the Oath Keepers, it's the Three Percenters, it's NSC 131, it's Atomwaffen, and I could just continuously name more groups that are just organized fascist, basically brown shirt groups that go around and terrorize populations, like they did in Olympia last week, like they did 2 weeks ago in Portland, and like they've been doing all around the country for the past 6-7 years now, at least just the new groups that I mentioned, but they've been doing this all over the country for the past, since World War II.
While anti-fascism itself might be an ideology, there's certainly individual groups, like the way that you just described a bunch of, conservative groups. You wouldn't call conservatism an organization, but there are conservative groups. Would he have been correct if he said, like, leader of an anti-fascist group? How do you see yourself in reference to organizing?
I wasn't organizing events and protests at that time. I was, my role in the community during the uprising wasn't organizing protests, wasn't leading marches, wasn't speaking, because I'm white. I didn't grow up poor. Well, I did grow up poor, but I didn't grow up poor in a neighborhood where I was black, and I was constantly afraid that I was going to be harmed by police or by my teachers or by, just a variety of different dangers that you have when growing up in certain communities. I was a little more privileged, a lot more privileged than most people who aren't white. And I think that because of that, I chose not to be the person in front of the camera, the person leading the march, and I was there to basically help my friends and help my comrades around me. I was there to make sure that folks who were new didn't get harmed in a protest, because at the time the police were just attacking us for no reason every single day. I mean, there was a day where Trump wanted to take a photo op, so they literally started shooting tear gas and beating people up. So my role was a support role, was there to, ensure people's safety, and so when people call me a leader of a group, that's insane. I didn't organize anything. I don't have a group that I associate with. I just associate with a movement, and my role in that movement is support.
With that in mind, why do you think the DOJ characterized you that way?
In a support role, my job was sometimes to be the liaison to press, to the community at large, sometimes talk to the police when there were protests going on, for the organizers, and so they thought I was leading things because I was always there, and I've been there I've been in DC doing this for about 6-7 years now, and I was doing this in Occupy Wall Street when I was a teenager up in New York. I'm a known person in the community, and I guess because they thought they could, they decided to arrest me, and they decided to make me the face. They thought I'd probably make a good face for this, but in reality, me and the people who got arrested for the Andrew Jackson incident, none of us knew each other. Like, none of us had each other's phone numbers. None of us have met each other before. I've still to this day not met any of my co-defendants. So it's ludicrous to say that I was the ringleader of anything.
And so when you were arrested, you faced 20 years on paper in prison, and that was because of Trump's executive order. How did that sort of affect the direction and outcome of your case?
Well, it affected it a lot. It was pretty scary that the president decided to make an executive order for me and a small group of other people. And it didn't really seem like justice that a mad president can just decide to make a law, and then I'm facing more time in prison for it. There are a lot of laws in this country that are unjust. I think that it's the right of the people to stand up for unjust laws, and I think that when the president signed that executive order, that was an unjust law, because there were already laws in place that I was already being prosecuted for the same thing. It was just adding on something that was needless. But it was shocking for sure.
Did you go into these situations with it in mind that you could face something like that?
Oh yeah, no, I was definitely, it's definitely very hard not to think the worst case scenario, especially with a president like Donald Trump, who is known to do wild things that no one expects. I never knew what the future had laid in, like, I never knew what was going to happen to me in the future. I really didn't. And it was very scary. I did not know, am I going to get arrested again for the wrong reason? I stopped going to protest because it became very clear the police were just going to arrest me for any reason that they could get. And that doesn't go away. I mean, even with the charge that I pled guilty to, I can face up to 6 months in jail, and that does definitely make me think and reflect, and it's hard not to, because who wants to go to jail?
How does it feel being able to plead out of, felonies and misdemeanors all the way down to just one single misdemeanor? In one hand, I'm relieved. It's finally, it's all over. I'm not going to have to deal with a bunch of different things moving forward. I'm not going to have to spend more money on lawyer fees. I'm not going to have to sit in court anymore. I can just get it over with. But at the same time, that waiting, as I said, that waiting before sentencing is definitely something always on my mind, and something that I always worry about, because I've been injured, and the idea of me not being able to
tools like my cane, which I need to walk, frightens me, to be honest. It's a scary feeling, and I don't think that's going to go away.
With the kind of fear that he was able to install with that, high-level charging with the 10 years in prison as a possibility, was that effective as a deterrent? Like, if Trump believed that he was stopping it from happening by imposing stiffer penalties, was he right?
Well, I didn't organize any of the protests that I was being charged for. Those protests were going to happen whether I was there or not, so it wasn't an effective tool, you ask me.
Do you think you could have made out with a deal like, pleading guilty to just one misdemeanor if Trump had been reelected?
I don't think that the president and I don't think the person in the White House was ever going to affect the outcome of my trial. I think that the judge was always going to be as fair as they're going to be, and the prosecutor was going to be as fair as they were going to be, and I don't think that it matters if it's a Democrat or a Republican, or a Trump Republican.
And so, more broadly speaking, it seems like this kind of conflict that happens on the street has lowered in temperature a little bit since the transition into the Biden administration.
I have to disagree.
Okay.
I think it's taken a different form. There's a lot more right-wing violence going on around the country, especially with this vaccine quote-unquote debate that's going on. I can't call it a debate because that would validate anti-vaxxers' ideology, and I don't validate it, so I wouldn't want to call it a debate. It's more of a fight to get the truth out to the public. The same thing with masks, and these fights that are going on are causing right-wing violence all over the country. Proud Boys are showing up to school board meetings where school boards have to get shut down, like what happened in Olympia. And not just Olympia, it's happening all over the country. A dad came in with zip ties to a school to try to arrest the principal for enforcing a mask mandate. People say it's dying down, but it's just taking a different form, the far-right groups that were causing all this violence, the far-right groups that were leading the charge on January 6th are still leading the charge in these violent events happening all over the country.
A criticism that I've heard from the right of the left as it relates to these issues, particularly anti-fascists, is that, mandating vaccines is fascism. What is the anti-fascist position on vaccination as far as you're concerned?
Definitely a tough question, because generally we don't want any type of enforcement, like any type of mandate like that imposed on anyone, because we believe in the rights of the people. But we also believe in the safety of the general populace. I believe that as long as your rights aren't infringing on someone else's rights, I don't believe there's much of a problem. And in this one case, with the vaccine, with not wearing a mask, you're endangering other people with your choices.
What is the Antifa movement's position on President Biden?
I cannot speak for every anti-fascist in the country, and I would never try to. My personal opinion is he's better than the last guy, but there could have been a lot better of a person put there. But at the end of the day, we live in a country that is not going to shift much because of people like Biden and Nancy Pelosi and the current leaders of the Democratic Party, who are really just keeping the status quo and not really progressing. We're supposed to be progressives, we're supposed to be causing progress, but in reality all they're doing at the end of the day is just stopping the Republicans from doing more harm than they've already done to this country.
The rivalry between Antifa and Trump supporters doesn't seem to have really changed in the absence of Trump as president himself. Specifically, coming up is September 18th, where Antifa organizers have called for counter-protests as people are planning to go out to the Capitol in favor of releasing January 6th defendants. What do you sort of see as the future of this issue, but especially specifically September 18th?
I'm weary of September 18th, only because I've been there in the worst possible scenarios. I was there in Charlottesville when Heather was hit by James Fields. I watched one of my best friends at the time try to save her life through CPR, and unfortunately was pulled off by the cops, even though he's a professional EMT and the other person was a ER nurse. And Heather died. So I've seen the worst. So I fear for the worst, and I hope. But we also have the saying, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. I'm hoping that it's going to be a small group of people because they are fearful now of the deep state coming after them. And I'm hoping because Donald Trump's not going to be there that you're going to see a much smaller crowd, and that they're not going to be able to get away with what they did the last time, because what they got away with last time was literally murder, was damaging not only to the moral core of this country, but to every single American who lives in it, and to every person in DC who is scared shitless about what was going to happen if they succeeded. And I think that this city has learned from that and is going to do everything they can, whether that's the community or the government doing something to ensure that September 18th is not a repeat of January 6th.
Why not just let law enforcement kind of deal with it? Why actually show up in physical space?
I think that if people think that they can come out in safe numbers to stop those folks, it would go a long way, because it shows that the community stands up against this hate, stands up against people who want to create a country that's for white people and that's for their quote-unquote heritage, when the majority of them are not even from the South, and their grandfathers or great-grandfathers weren't in the Confederacy, so hate to break it to them, it's not even their heritage, but they fight for this quote-unquote white heritage, but they're really, they're fighting for hate, and I think it's the duty of the people to stand up to that hate.
Is that your view of what Trump supporters on January 6th were doing?
They were definitely a outcry of anger from the group of people who have been considered the majority for a very long time, and a group of people who are afraid that their quote-unquote good life is being stopped by the radical communist democratic agenda. Sorry for laughing, just Democrats aren't anti-capitalist and will never be communists, but I'll let them have their little thing. I think that January 6th was a group of people who were really scared that their way of life was going to change, and that their way of life, unfortunately, is hate, is preferential treatment for white people. It's a system that upholds racist ideologies and enforces them. And they were afraid that was going to change radically, and that's why they came out. And I think that they're wrong. And I think that deep down, all these things that they claim they're actually out there for, medical freedom, whatever the they're claiming, whether it's election lies, any of these things that they claim, I could go into a million of them, but they're really just dog whistles for people who are afraid that their way of life is changing, and it is. And America is slowly on the path to progress, but that's 40, 50 years down the road.
Put another way, do you see your side as winning?
God no. I mean,
Why not?
Both parties, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, generally aren't doing anything to change this country. They're both enforcing the same ideas that they've been enforcing for the past 30, 40 years. And they're going to continue enforcing this broken oligarchical society. They really are just enforcing the status quo, where rich people are going to continue to get richer and poor people are going to continue to get poorer.
And so what does the future of the Antifa movement look like, sort of for you or for the country more broadly?
As I said, I can't speak for every anti-fascist, but where I see it moving, I see it growing. I see I see more organizations supporting just the idea of calling themselves anti-fascist. I see people running for office, hopefully, whether that be local or national, under an anti-fascist agenda and a social justice agenda. And I hope to see a future where we're not living under constant fear of hate taking over.
Jason Charter is expected to be sentenced on the single misdemeanor count in December. Ford Fisher, News to Share, Washington, D.C.